Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about careers in gaming. Subtitle, It's Awesome. I came up with that subtitle due to a class. I was joking around, and for some reason it kind of stuck. Maybe because it really is awesome. Gaming careers, I always think of in kind of three different ways. There's lots of ways to classify them, but let's do it this way. Um, and this will hit most of the gaming, but gaming is diverse as any field is going to be because, as games grow, there's more and more needs and more mechanics that need to be defined. And is it going to be a money game? Is it going to be a physics game? Is it going to include history and things like that? And so pretty soon, all of a sudden, let's say it's a history game. Guess what? You're probably going to talk to someone who knows history, right? So all of a sudden, somebody whose major was history is working on a game. But let's jump into it just to talk about these three different things. And I always think of this as the production, the development, and the design. A lot of times, development and design are used synonymously. I don't think of them that way. So this is the way I want you to think of them. The development is the creation of parts, and then design is the assembly of those parts. So in other words, let's say somebody asked me to come in and make their, I don't know, living room beautiful. um, I have to go in and put put chairs, couches, lamps, all those things, and design that room to look good. So that's the design part. But there's someone who has to make those couches, or someone has to make a lamp. Those would be the developers in this case. The same way for games. Someone might make an asset like a 3D model. Let's say of an orc or something like that. And then someone puts that into a level. So the person who makes the orc is I would consider a developer, and the person who designs a level using orcs and elves and all this other stuff would be a designer. So let's think about that way, and let's go through these tracks together. We start off with the production track. I always maybe I should put this at the end. I always think of this as kind of the business part of it. The other thing I have, and maybe this is just me, is I always think of these as the unfun jobs, but you have the best ability to make the most lot of money. The reason this usually goes first is because a lot of my students like the idea of becoming a CEO and driving a fancy car or something like that. Those dreams are great. But the problem with it is a lot of times you start off at the very lowest level. And as you can see, I actually did put the word boring in there. I think that's my word, because you're doing a lot of grunt work, but then you kind of work up. I mean, think of the way a movie's done. Somebody has to go and get the supplies, right? Someone has to go out and buy lamps and bring them in, right? Who does that? Well, guess what? That's going to be more on the production end than in the designing end or the development. So you start off customer service. This can be very rewarding. I had one of my mentors started off in customer service. He ended up in a very good 3D artist. And he said customer service. He liked it because a lot of people are very appreciative, and he felt like he was helping people. But there's for a lot of those, like say 9 of those good things, there's always those one caller who's just nuts. So you need this kind of the patience and being able to get your point across and not get people angry. At the very lowest rung, you tend to do very simple things and do them over and over and over and over again. So it can be very tedious. As you grow, sometimes you can test entire levels, and you can kind of get into the problem-solving aspect. Sometimes you get stuck in these types of jobs. Other times they can actually turn into pretty good either design or development jobs because you learn so much of how things work. And if you're very talented, I could easily see someone being a programmer getting out of this. The last bullet is probably the scariest. It is very seasonal because if I'm at a testing facility, um, and let's say I'm working on the latest game, we test at the end. If there's not another game to test, I might get laid off. There are some houses that just do testing, but a lot of game makers are very scared to go there, or I don't say are maybe timid. The reason being is that um, a lot of times things will get leaked out of there, and so a lot of them struggle a little bit. But that's not to say if you this is bad. If you work at a big company and do QA, a lot of times you can keep that going. And I kind of talked about this a little bit. So the big thing about Q&A is a little bigger in scope than testing. Um, and I'll use the word grain size a lot. So the smaller the grain, the littler the problem, let's say. The one thing that QA should be is that last bullet is separate from the rest of production. It's very easy to get stuck in a rut with testing. That means if I make a game, I'm going to be aware of its flaws and I'm going to use it a particular way, and that way is the way I intended to do it. But unfortunately, most users, um, if you get like 1,000 users, there's going to be someone who uses it differently than you do. So what you want to do is keep the creators away from this, and so they don't have a lot of influence on the people testing it and doing quality assurance, because then they can actually come up with more flaws, essentially, or flies in the ointment, and then you can hand it back to the creators and fix those specific things. Now we're going to move up the ladder, but this sounds great. Assistant producer sounds really cool, but look at that. Look at that first bullet. Burn CDs. That's what you're going to do. That's kind of an old one. You might burn DVDs. You might do other things, make backups. That's something. But as you can see, it's not necessarily the greatest work. A lot of research, which is good, which can be fun, but can also be let's go looking through the web for 2 hours to find 3 bits of data. Then you kind of move up to associate producer, and associate always means a little higher than assistant. so this now you're kind of looking over things, and you have kind of almost more managerial purview. So the assistant kind of aids the associate and the producer, but they don't really have a lot of control over a lot of people underneath them. They might bring up some points, but that they usually report to that associate. Then the next logical step is the producer, right? This is going to be as the second bullet says, the keeper of the vision. They want to make sure everything is going to work, and this game, as you can see, they're going to do a whole game. Everything falls into this line. They won't necessarily design it. They'll have impact on it, and they won't kind of get into the development either. So it's more just, hey, do we think this will sell kind of idea, as opposed to, hey, is this a really cool game? Hey, does this mechanic work? I know I'm going to, I think, restrict names here. So I know an owner of a company, and he worked with a very famous person. And so the very famous person was essentially the producer, and he was making the game, and he was, pretty much the top of the company. And one of the things he told me was, that they came down, they had a meeting, and really they had 3 points, and most of them were easy to do. And one of them was, okay, the producer wants you to change the name of the lead character. So you do have a little bit of control, but it's kind of more of that kind of knick-knacky thing. I don't think this character's name is going to sell games. Let's give him a cooler name or something like that. And then executive producer sees everything, and is going to be worried about multiple platforms, as you can see in the development contracts. So he is going to essentially deal with heavy money decisions. and where you're going to put. So in other words, those testers we were talking about earlier, the executive producer is going to decide whether you're going to test in-house or whether you're going to pay a bunch of testers at a testing compound. All right, now let's go to the development track. This one's near and dear to my heart because I actually probably like this one the best, although they're all kind of fun. So here you get to do what you want to do. So if you're a programmer, you can go hide in your cubby and turn off the lights and just code all day. But as you'll see, there's not these huge tiers of progression to get promoted. Which usually doesn't bother these people either. That because they enjoy it. Sometimes you get promoted into a really bad job. Sometimes the worst jobs at a company are vice president. So let's talk about the programming first. Here you're going to program anything under the sun. Whatever your game is going to do, you have to know, and you have to know the methodology too. So what I would say is you have to go according to the standards that are and practices that are done by your particular coders. I've taught Python in the past, and I've taught C++, and how we teach these students just to do stuff like syntax, like Python, you'll use dashes, whereas in C++ you tend to use camel case. Stuff like that is specific to. And as you can see, you start off as a junior, then you're a regular program, then you go to senior, and then after that you kind of go to a technical directorship. So all the lead programmers, so a lot of times the lead programmers will kind of guide the junior programmers, and then the leads will go to one technical director who's got really a huge job in trying to make sure everything fits. That's why I've known companies that have had like close to 50 programmers, and those 50 programmers are going 50 different directions. That is a nightmare. You have to essentially be a little bit of a cattle rustler to kind of make sure everybody is following the same steps and their code works with each other. And that's why it takes a lot of experience. You should not come out of college and try to take a technical directorship. That would be just too much, and you would not enjoy it, even if eventually that's what you want to become. Okay, let's go to the art and animation. When I say most time consuming, I'm also talking most money consuming. Roughly, when you're talking about a AAA game, 80% of the money and 80% of the time go to art and animation. Anybody who's used Maya, 3ds Max, ZBrush, whatever, you'll know it's a labor of love, but it is definitely a labor. So it takes a lot of time. You can do 2 or 3D art even in a 3D game. So a 2D game, in a 2D game, like a side scroller or something like that. Obviously, you could be doing pixel painting, you could be doing sprites, and so forth. 3D modeling, or 3D in a 3D game, you're going to do modeling, you're going to be texturing. And if you think about texturing is really 2D. But then you got to think about GUIs, or maybe just in-game 2D modeling, like let's say somebody walks by a TV screen in a game. You have to, or maybe more importantly, like a console or something like that. You're going to have to lay that out in 2D. And generally, a lot of times artists will be junior, senior, etc. They may all go to a director, or they may have their own directors, depending on. And that maybe I'll take a step back for a second. These types of jobs always depend on the size of your game business. So, in other words, if you're 3 people, guess what? You're not going to have all these positions. One guy's probably going to be art. One guy's probably going to be programming. One guy's going to be, let's get the game out, and I'll do whatever it takes to publish and do the business side of it. And then you'll get the opportunity to help each other out when things go slow, right? And for one of those groups. Okay, so in audio, this is probably, unfortunately, there's probably the least amount of growth in these jobs. meaning promotion. Like if you start off as an audio engineer, you might be an audio engineer 10 years from now. You might be the only audio engineer on at your company because it's very specific. Now, luckily, most games need sound, music, um, ambient effects, voiceovers, etc. But there's there this is usually a small group of people who usually handle it. You're not going to see 25 people doing this usually. It's probably one of the more fun jobs because if you have a gun, you want to make a gun sound in a game, guess what you do? You go get your microphone, go out in the backyard and shoot off a gun. Actually, maybe I shouldn't say that. Don't do that. Don't do this at home. The cops will show up. But you'll go to a sound booth and do that, or maybe a shooting ground or something like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. Obviously, these guys a lot of times will get pulled from music majors or from the studio, not a game studio in this case, like a recording studio. Development track, you always need managers. A lot of times technical directors and producers act as managers, but there's always a chance that you're going to need a manager, especially, we haven't really talked about the business side. There's usually somebody has to do a business interface because remember, you're buying software for people to use. You might be selling your product, etc. These people there has to be somebody who does that business side of this and figures it all out. All right, let's get to the design track because this is going to be very fun, very high variety in it. So development, you have a high variety of individuals. So an artist is nothing like a programmer usually, and a sound guy is not necessarily very much like a 3D artist. Here, the jobs in design can be very varied within the individual job. So, so that lends itself to high creativity. Design is probably what most people can get into, and there are a lot of good design colleges, but when I was developing the curriculum here, I was a little scared to go design. I hate saying this, but a designer is incredibly useful and can make a game go or flop. That's how much they are important, but they don't necessarily need to be incredibly high thinkers. So in other words, someone who knows programming inside and out, you really need like a master's or a doctorate sometimes to just understand the actual software development side of this. With a high school degree, you can actually become a great game designer. The problem is that since you could actually be a really good from high school, you could be a really good designer. Guess how many people are going into this field? This is probably the highest competition to get in this field is the game design side. So we always had the problem of competition. Now let's talk about what type of designers you could be. Level designers, and this can even be broken up. I know a couple people who went out and tried to be quest designers, which would be even within a level sometimes. And basically now, remember the idea of development design. These guys are going to take what the developers made and put them together. They're going to, as you can see, build worlds, usually using a game engine because, again, they don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel in most cases. They might craft some things themselves, but most of it's going to be others' work. Yeah, it also can put the challenges. I always say that these guys probably have the most effect on fun, but because there's so many of them, a lot of times we tend not to think of them as the most important. Because the game designers are going to be fewer and less of, and then they're probably going to get paid a bit more. So they use, as you can see, they tend to work with the level designers. They're going to worry about what I refer to as macro issues, bigger scaled issues, larger grain size, and they might actually come up with the basic rules of the game. That again, the game level the level designers will use, but they're the ones who come up with those bases, the basis of it. And the lead designer might make has an even broader piece. So in other words, when we talked about the keeper of the vision on the production side, well, the maker of the vision is essentially the lead designer, and then he's going to think, well, who's going to play this game? How they what's the end game of it? What's the focus of this? What's going to be the main challenges of this? The economy, which used to be a bigger thing, but even now is can be significant. Is it going to be? What's the day going to be like? Are we going to have days and nights, et cetera, et cetera? All these very big questions are going to have to get broken down by the game designer and then used by the level designer and start here. That is the end. um, Now, are there more game jobs in the system? Yes, there's lots of game jobs that are peripheral to this, and probably even a couple branches now that have kind of spread out. Like, there's definite need for graphic designers now. I kind of associate them more with the 2D artists, but graphic design is part of it, because even if this never makes it to a box, you have to have some type of display to show, when somebody pulls it up on Steam or something like that. And speaking of designers, you might even want to do like a UI designer, somebody who does a user interface or user experience type of thing to kind of, how is the game going to be played? How are we going to test it? My way into games was actually through what we refer to as serious games. I actually did physics, and so I made models, physics models of things, how things are going to crush, how things are going to get smushed, that sort of thing. That is a viable job too. So production design development idea can house more, but as I've said before, since this is such an expansive career, and it's such an expansive undertaking to make a game of every flavor nowadays, that the types of jobs is flourishing. So I guess my end point to you would be good luck, and think about what you want to do.